From Theatrical Shenanigans, this is The Panel Presents with
Evan Boffman,
Alli Hartley-Kong,
Chris Susi,
Vidalia, Unwin.
Hello there, and welcome to our April edition of The Panel Presents here on Theatrical Shenanigans with me, your host, Rachel Feeney-Williams. For those new to the series, on the first Saturday of every month, I gather panellists from all over and we have some wonderful, fascinating chat about all things theatrical. So let's meet our four panellists, shall we? My first panellist hails from Southern California and comes with the title Playwright, Author and Educator. He's a playwriting member of Playground LA and is a company member with Force of Nature Productions. A number of his plays are published through Hoyer Publishing, Youth Plays, Next Stage Press and Drama Notebook. He's also found success writing horror fiction with his works found in anthologies by No Bad Books Press, Critical Blast Publishing and Black Hair Press. His own books include The Emaciated Man, Vanishing of the Seventh Grade, Bad for Your Teeth, and Try Not to Die in a Dark Fairy Tale. So I'm glad he's found time in his busyness to chat to us. Welcome, Evan Boffman.
hello, great to be here.
My second panellist hails from Washington, D.C., where she creates feminist fat positive theatre. She's written over a dozen short plays that have been performed at theatres around the world, from the United States to Australia, and now focuses on her full-length plays. Her play, People Should Talk About What's Real, is a Bay Area Playwrights Festival semi-finalist and Henley Rose Award finalist. And if all that wasn't enough, by day she's a public historian and museum educator, creating work that engages with a sense of history, although she rarely writes historical pieces. Welcome, Alli Hartley-Kong.
Hello.
My third panellist is an Asian American actor, puppeteer, director, screenwriter and playwright living in Savannah, Georgia. He's been writing for stage and screen for over 20 years and is the owner of a fabulous collection of plays, all of which can be found on New Play Exchange. He's also a familiar voice on Theatrical Shenanigans, having performed in Stalk Patrol in Season 1 and the Paranormal Club's 7th Annual Haunted House Sleepover in Season 2. So it's a thrill to have him back. Welcome, Chris Susi.
hello.
And last but certainly not least, my fourth panellist is based out of Louisville, Kentucky, and unofficially studied creative writing at the University of Louisville. And she also unofficially studied theatre at Bellarmine University. Her full-length plays include Domesticate, Punk Snot, Broken Iris, Atcon, and The Ballad of Night Moose, written with Lex Mitchell. She's been a member of the Derby City Playwright Writing Collective since 2015 and a frequent contributor and performer with Louisville-based sketch group Sketchy Stuff. So another busy person. Welcome, Vidalia Unwin.
Hi there.
Okay, so we start, as always, with a question for all of you. What would be the title of the play of your life? And we start with Chris.
I've always thought that the title would be The Uncommon Faith of a Common Man.
Alli?
So I've always thought the title of the play of my life would be Just Right, Stupid, because I have always been a writer. I had my first poem published in the 3rd grade in the local newspaper, and yet I spent a lot of my life resisting writing and trying other things and always, just keeping my writing to myself and not sharing it. And as soon as I started embracing writing more seriously, it was so obvious that this was what I should have been doing all along. So just write, stupid.
Evan?
Scary stories to tell in the spotlight. I'm big into horror. And if I'm up on stage talking about my life, something went wrong because I'm not really an actor. So I'd be, pretty frightened to be up there, scary stories to tell in the spotlight.
Yeah. Vidalia?
I always thought if I wrote an autobiography, I would want the title to be I Am Awesome, parentheses, and Other Lies by Me. But that works well for an autobiography. It doesn't necessarily work well on a stage. And trying to think about stage, I have a tattoo of the word logic on my arm that is quite meaningful to me. So I feel like the girl with the logic tattoo, probably a good one to go with.
Okay. Evan, with there being so many books, newspaper columns, blogs, and podcasts on how to write, do you really think there are such things as good and bad ways to write?
I don't think that there is one way of writing that works for everyone. I think whatever just gets you going, whatever gets those creative juices flowing is probably best. I don't think that there's really a terrible, what works for one person doesn't work for another person. I would say probably the only bad way of writing is not writing. I mean, if you're a writer, you should be writing. Now, for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm writing every day. Maybe sometimes my writing is like I'm researching, or I'm revising, or I'm submitting to opportunities, or I'm reading for inspiration, I'm outlining, I'm brainstorming. So just so long, I think, as if you're really serious about being a writer, you've got to somehow be doing something every day that's supportive of that creative process. And so I guess bad writing in my, if you could call writing bad, I guess would just be like something that's overdone or cliched. So if you're going to approach a subject, at least try to do it from some angle that you haven't seen done before.
There's a lot of stigma attached to the idea of fan fiction writing, and I've seen a lot of negative commentary on that, saying, you know, it's not real writing because they're not your characters and it's not your story. And it's like, well, you know, I mean, if you go back far enough, everything may or may not have been stolen by someone at some point.
Very true. You know, and the reality is, I mean, are there any really original ideas out there anymore? Every type of story has already been written, right? So, and the challenge, I guess, is for you to try to, even if you're going to use characters that already exist, is to try to put your own spin on it in some way. Try to make it surprising in some way, I guess. So if you're going to use a character that already exists, like maybe subvert the expectations in some way.
I always find on New Play Exchange, plays that intrigue me are when they've created characters out of something you wouldn't expect. So when they create characters out of inanimate objects or emotions, or I did one called Happy Holidays, where the characters were holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and that kind of thing. So I find if you can present, even if the story isn't necessarily 100% unique, if you can put a unique twist on it, that makes the difference.
Yeah. And so I write a lot of horror stuff, and you know, there's thousands of zombie stories out there, thousands of vampire stories. But if I'm going to write a zombie story or a vampire story, I'm not going to do it unless I think I can kind of do something new with it. So, so I think what you mentioned there with, you know, anthropomorphizing the holidays, that's really clever. And like, that's a way to, you know, to approach a holiday play in a really creative way. So that's cool.
To me, I look at whatever writing you're doing, like every writer is on their journey, and writing fanfic and writing something that derives from other characters might just be a step that a writer needs on their journey. When I was younger, I wrote fanfic. I don't write fanfic anymore, but that was the first time that I ever shared my writing with the world and got random strangers that I didn't know on the internet commenting on my writing, and that was a really important learning process in my writing. I'm working on, and I've never written an adaptation before, and I'm working on an adaptation now, and it's a Little Woman, and it's a big challenge because it's something that has been adapted quite a bit, trying to figure out what my angle is going to be on that. And it may not turn into anything. I may, you know, I'm just at the beginning stages of this project, but I do know what I'm learning from it is going to be a journey, a step in my journey. So I think the way I think of writing is like, you just have to keep on doing these steps in your own journey and figuring out what works for you.
You know, part of the gatekeeping with fanfic, though, is a lot of people who are mad that there's a sea of what they see as untalented, directionless writers. And I hate that opinion. And it's so, you know, everything ever written, it's what you were saying, Evan, about there being no original ideas. Everything is a fanfic. Even if you are writing some sort of original character, it's based on something you've seen. It's some sort of fanship of something. Anytime, you know, television writers are getting together, they're consistently writing fanfics about someone else's idea, and we all watch it or don't. Part of the rage of that is that there's the idea that if you're going to be a writer, you have to be a great writer. You have to be a good writer, be something for other people. And it doesn't. It, like many arts, it's just an expression you can do. Whenever you get the people that say there's good and bad ways to write or who are mad at fanfic, they hate that aspect of it. And they're mad that people are trying.
It's also picking up what you said about being a great writer. You look, people go talk about, obviously, the air quotes classic writers all the time. They talk about, you know, Dickens and Austen and Shelley and all this. And it's like, yes, they were great writers, and yes, they created great works, but there were probably also a lot less writers back then than there are now. So the competition probably for being the air quotes great writer is a lot less fierce, a lot more fierce, sorry, I should say, now than it was then.
Have you ever actually read like a collection of letters written in the 1800s, early part of the 1900s, people just corresponding with each other? Some of those are the most beautifully written things I've ever read. And the truth of the matter is that that notion of writing seems to stick to that. You know, are you published? You know, what are your awards? What are your, you know, accolades? And the truth of the matter is none of those matter in the end. You know, I always say that it's not even write what you know, it's write what you want to read. You know, write what appeals to you. You are the first audience of anything you create, and therefore you should be entertaining yourself with your words and entertaining your notions and your thoughts and exploring. And yeah, I agree, everything is fan fiction because you are drawing from the things you like. You know, that characteristic in a person that you admire, that character from a play or book that you really loved, you take elements of that and you pour it into your creation, and you are influenced by the things that appeal to you, and then you express those things, and that is the new thing. They always say that there's only so many storylines, but the truth of the matter is every single person's an individual, separate and alone. And that gives you your unique quality. And so if you take on the task of telling a story filtered through you, then you are creating that original work. It's just a matter of not relying so heavily on all these external things, all the books that tell you how to write and all the people who tell you what a writer is and all those other things, but trying to inspire or light a fire inside of you, which is why I think a lot of fan fiction is created, is because people saw the movie or read the story and they're like, I love these characters, I want more of these characters, and they start down a path of exploring what happened to them in this instance, or what would these characters be like here, which in essence is an entirely different animal if you just renamed all those characters, like in the case of 50 Shades of Grey, which was a Twilight fan fiction. Just rewriting the names, all of a sudden you have an original, quote unquote, original work. So I do think that there's a lot of ways to write and a lot of instructions on writing, but I do think that the bottom line is always right. Right is the writer's right.
I get my ideas from all sorts of places. You know, I'm randomly reading an article on something and that inspires, you know, something, and you know, I'm in my phone, I have a list of just story ideas, right? And they stem from articles I've read or from something I, you know, learned in a YouTube video, or something I observed just out in public, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's like a 1 or 2 sentence little blurb that only I would understand what it means. If someone, you know, picked up my phone, they wouldn't know what this meant. But for me, like the spark of some creative idea. So yeah, I've got like a list of maybe 50 things right now that could potentially become a play someday, or a short story, or who knows what. But yeah, you just kind of, at least what I do is I just kind of grab things from what I'm reading or what I see happening around me.
And it can span from anywhere as well. A play that I've written that started out as 15 pages, which was then developed into a full length, which has won awards, that came from the word fence. One word. And it's like, I can't explain where that came from. I don't know why it went there, and I would not even dream of trying to explain it coherently, but it did. Okay, Evan, your final thought.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a teacher. I'm a middle school teacher. I work with children ages 11 to 15. And so this idea of bad writing, technically I read a lot of bad writing written by my students, um, but I don't try to, I never tell them that I think this story is cliched or anything like that. Because as was mentioned earlier by others here, it's a creative process that the kid wrote it in a way that, you know, it made them feel, at least in the moment, like they're an artist in some way. And so, you know, that's really what's important for me as a teacher, as a creative writing teacher, like to get kids feeling like writing doesn't have to just be this boring thing where you're writing essays and research papers, you know, analytic paragraphs for some class. It could also be this fun exercise where you just, you know, let your mind open up and the words spill out. So
Vidalia, Michelle Terry previously revealed she will not play the iconic disabled figure of Richard III with a visible or physical impairment. In light of this, where do you think the boundary lies regarding portrayal of character?
What you're fundamentally asking about is, can someone of not that group play someone of that group? Generally, my policy on that is to shut the fuck up and let the people affected kind of decide on a thing like that. But my inroad to a similar kind of thing is I'm a trans woman, and I can have that discussion about non-trans folk playing trans folk. And you know, at the end of the day, how can I put this? There's a physicality, there's a behavior to being trans that is difficult for a cis person to play. Can it be played? Yes, we've seen many instances of it throughout many centuries of theater and film. There was a time in the world in which it made perfect sense for everybody that a white person would put on blackface to play a black person. At a certain point, that became not a good idea to most people. And I'm sure at that time there were people saying, hey, why can't we? We've always done this before. Why can't I as an actor perform this thing? And I think just broadly what you're addressing is that we've reached a precipice of that for a lot of different groups. And I'm excited to see how it evolves.
Yeah, because I mean, the central argument behind the Richard III thing was that he was known for his being physically disabled, and that was the reason why they should stick with historically what has been portrayed of him before. But then if you apply that to bigger productions, I mean, Hamilton would never have got off the ground if that was the case.
A writer, I think there's a kind of unique and different way that writers are approaching this question, because I know for me, when I'm crafting my plays, I am a cis heterosexual white woman, but I know that the world we live in is incredibly diverse, and not every play that I write, you know, plays have casts of characters in it, unless you're writing a monologue play, and I don't want every character to share my identity. At the same time, I think about if I was writing a play and writing it from someone else's identity, which I generally don't do. Usually I have characters that are of different identities, but the core story comes from somebody that's an identity that I understand. You know, I wouldn't want to be writing a play and have somebody from that identity come and say you got this wrong, or feel bad about the way that they were portrayed. So I do think like as playwrights, we have an obligation towards authenticity, and like, what is it about a specific experience that is making you want to write that experience? I think those are some of the questions worth interrogating. And there's, you know, I've worked with you know, like independent consultants of different identities that you can pay as sensitivity readers, and to really make sure that if I'm writing, because like I said, not all my characters in the world that I play, because the world we inhabit is not all of people that have the same identity as me, but what am I doing to ensure for my other characters, generally not the primary character, but my other character, how am I creating these authentic, honest and sensitive portrayals?
I think also I think the flexibility with it also stems from who you are answering to. So, for example, with Richard III, written by Shakespeare as a man with a severe curvature of the spine, which is what caused his disability, which they are now no longer portraying. And essentially, they've not really got anything to worry about, because Shakespeare's not about to come storming into their rehearsal space and go, no. But you then take that into modern day, there are so many risks with portrayals of characters, because you will end up having people to answer to. And it's not just about like gender or disability or race anymore. It's about every like spectrum of belief. And I sometimes wonder whether the pendulum has swung back too far the other way, in the sense that writers are being criticized for writing characters they haven't necessarily lived, but they are well within their rights to write. So as you say, as a white heterosexual woman, I shouldn't be disqualified from writing characters who are male or gay. But there are groups that have taken to social media and said, no, because you haven't lived it, ergo it's not your rights to write about that group of people.
I do think there is a pendulum swing at work here. And I think that we have to go through it. I think that we have to experience the pressure of these ideas coming at us, and the notion that our responsibilities lie in a broader context, in a broader way. But I do think that it will come back towards the center again. It just has to take time. We have to make these concessions and recognitions while it is present in our minds. And we just happen to be the people at the time when those questions are coming up, and when those ideas are being addressed, and when people are saying, we need the proper representation. We need people who are telling these stories the proper way. I have found oftentimes while writing, none of the characters I have are necessarily straight, or not necessarily able-bodied, not necessarily, there's nothing keeping them from being portrayed by anyone, because there's nothing in the story that relies upon their specific race, or their specific gender, or their specific, ability, or any of those things. But to make that clear becomes weirder and weirder. To sit there and say, I wrote this entire play, this character I refer to as he, but it could be played by a she, it could be she. There's nothing there. There's not like some romantic notion that I have to follow up with. No straight, storyline that needs to be addressed. No, nothing that they go through that is specifically gender specific. It just happens to be that at the time of writing, that is what I chose for this person. And so now that's a notation to make, is like, could be played by anyone. Does not have to be a male, because the story doesn't hinge on the fact that this is a male going through this. However, I am a male. And even stranger, I'm Asian, which doesn't read for a lot of people. So I have actually been called out on multiple occasions for writing from an Asian point of view, because I'm not Asian. And I'm like, but I am. It's like, it's weird how very triggered people are. Too quickly, like, oh, you can't write about that because you don't know what that sensation is. It's like, are you sure I don't know that? Are you certain that I'm not a member of that community, and that I'm not writing from that point of view? I actually stopped writing Asian stories because of that critique, because I got that critique so often that I'm like, I do not want to have to say Christopher Soucy, Korean American writer, on everything I do. It's just weird. It's like, I'm just a playwright. I just want to write plays. But if I address certain things, I get flack for it. For instance, I also get the note, this sounds like it was written by a man, when they talk about certain characters. Like if I write a female character, they're like, this sounds like it was written by a man. It's like, it was. It's like, I'm trying to get behind the critique, and it's like, is there something specific about being written like a man that makes it not work? And I'm more than open to a criticism of the mechanics that are missing. But if the only critique that is mustered is it's written like a man, it's like, do you want me to write like a woman? I don't know what that even means. I'm like, I'm just trying to tell a story. And if I'm falling short in some way, I would like more specificity. I would like, well, this character is not, exhibiting the empathy that we would think that this character would have, blah, 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 rather than this kind of blanket statement of condemnation from my point of view. Again, I can accept it. It's just it's a hard thing to correct for me. It's like, oh well, I will write it less like a man, I guess. That is a strange note. And I will note, I've only ever heard it when people knew that I was a man writing it. In blind, I've never heard it once in a blind submission. I've never heard it once in a blind feedback when they didn't know who I was or anything like that. I've never heard that phrase. And I'm like, it's interesting because I don't know how much of that is the reader taking into account that it was a man writing and then utilizing that as their filter to experience what I've written. And that becomes another level of exchange.
Yeah.
What is happening is, I think there are people who will put the artist before the art and only see it through that prism. So it becomes a never-ending cycle of what do we do to tell our stories with being as sensitive as we can to any process.
And it's also dangerous to kind of put people in that box because there's no consideration for how the piece was written. So I know a couple of male playwrights who wrote pieces in the wake of Roe v. Wade because it was a thing that happened and it made them angry and they wanted to write about it. And then one of them got a very angry email from a woman saying, as a man, he didn't have a right to write about it. And it's like, but he'd sat and done research and watched debates and kind of considered his position on things versus how other people in his friendship group and family felt about the whole thing, and then wrote this play. He didn't just kind of sit at a keyboard and rage type for an hour or so, but there was no consideration of that at all. All that mattered was that he was a man writing about, and I use air quotes for this, women's issue. And to put it in that box and just blindly ignore everything else that he's done around it is so dangerous because it disregards so much of the writing process. Admittedly, yes, the finished script is what a lot of submission competitions see, but you can't ignore everything that built to that. It's like I said earlier about every playwright's story is different. You may not have gone through that experience, but that doesn't change the fact that with the right amount of research and perspective, you can create an experience on a page.
To add to that, I would say it's not helpful to try to to quell whatever the writing or the creative spirit is within someone. So if someone feels like they have to write to something because it's a cathartic thing for them in some way, even if they personally haven't experienced whatever that is, like maybe like who you're speaking of, that writer who wrote about Roe v. Wade, they have thoughts and feelings about it, and for some reason they feel like they have to get that out of themselves. And I think that that's a very useful thing. I mean, a lot of things I write about it, I'm like commenting on the world at large in some way, and that just helps me feel better that I'm kind of like getting this out of my system. So these thoughts are not just like stuck in my head. They're now on a page, and maybe there's an audience that could, see how I'm feeling. Yeah. So I think to try to silence anyone or keep anyone in a box, as you were saying, that's not helpful to that person or that artist. They have to get those thoughts out there. And then once those thoughts are out there, then the artist has to understand, well, there's going to be some reactions to it, and they have to be open to if something is seen as insensitive, then they have to, be then open to revising and seeing things from other people's perspectives. But that's part of art, So.
Yeah, but then it's also what form that criticism takes. It's one thing to say, I think this is sensitive because of this, that, and the other, not this is shit because it was written by a man, which is what a lot of people are getting. And I think what you said about the creativity thing is another danger point as well, because it's going to end up pushing potentially new playwrights away from the idea, because they go, oh, well, I can't write about anything I've not experienced or I don't know about. What's the point in writing at all? So, Dali, your final thought on the subject.
World right now, at least the Western world, is going through such a massive cultural shift and very, very, very aggressively and with great difficulty, to the point where it seems to be that everyone has an agenda. And if they don't have an agenda, you just assume that they do. Consequently, anytime you look at something innocuous, you assume that thing has an agenda. And an unfortunate byproduct of that is that people are looking at well-meaning things, even good things, things they agree with, and saying, this is bad because I assume you have an agenda that is against what I'm going over. And unfortunately, I think we just have to ride that out. I think that will calm down. I think that will pass, but until it does, it's going to be just a bumpy ride of a lot of people bitching on the internet.
Chris, it is sometimes advised when creating work that writers should define the difference between you as a person, you as an artist, and you as a writer. Do you think the three should definitely be separated, or should they be considered one in the same?
The world that we're living in right now is kind of insistent on compressing every equality of an artist into one thing, a brand. I think that right now we're looking at this notion that every creator who makes content of any type is aligned under a single brand, and that brand has become the thing that people are utilizing to sell their plays, scripts, books, films, whatever. And so had you asked me this question 20 years ago, I would have said absolutely. I think that art in so many ways is a relationship between the artist and the art, and then the art and the audience, not necessarily the artist and the audience. I think that there is room for separation of those ideas, because art can influence and inspire and make people feel things contrary to what the artist intended. There is a relationship developed between the art that is consumed and the consumer. And when you add the artist in, oftentimes people start to change the art to reflect the artist. And that could be strangely damaging in a lot of ways. And that's because, when I was growing up, we didn't have the kind of access to information that everyone has now. When I was growing up and you wanted to know more about an artist, you went out and got a book. You went out and you worked at trying to figure out the nuances of the person. But it was so quick that people turned some personal default of the artist into a reason to dismiss the art. When I was, I lived in Italy when I was 12 years old. And so we got all this great Renaissance art, education. And one of my friends was really aggressively against Leonardo da Vinci because he had found out that Leonardo da Vinci was gay, and thereby his art is garbage. And I was like, that's obviously not true. The garbage part, I don't know about the gay part. The garbage part is obviously not true. It withstood hundreds upon hundreds of years of admiration. People love it. And when you stand in front of it, how can you not feel this amazing, immersive breadth of talent? But this person was willing to dismiss it because of some personal tidbit that he had gleaned from whatever source. And this was long before the internet. So whatever it was some kind of conspiracy theory-ish situation going on, where he had derived this information. And that was interesting to me because this same person also hated the music of Queen because they were gay. And I was like, or because Freddie Mercury was gay. And it was like, but the music is amazing. It's incredible. You can't say this is bad music. You're using some kind of personal, bias to determine something that kind of objectively is seen as good. So yeah, I find that interesting because now where we stand in modern world is we are immediately given all the information we need about the individual, about the artist, about who created it and where they were in their life and what was happening, and people dig and dig and dig and dig. I recently had an interview on a radio show where the person Googled me and was just asking questions that he found on Google about me. And it was so peculiar because it was like, where are you getting this information and why? It's not necessarily relevant to what we're talking about, but okay, we'll talk about it. But I think that now we don't really have a choice.
You see it most recently and most common. You see it with stand-up comedians all the time.
Oh, sure.
You'll get extremely controversial stand-up comedians who will get endless streams of hatred, and yet the man or the woman is nothing like the caricature they are on stage. They play that caricature to sell tickets and books and tours and everything else, but because that has become, as you said, their brand, their persona, people on, air quotes, the outside can't separate the two. So they become their persona.
Right.
I have found in my own experience dealing with stand-up comics and general dickbags who don't like trans folk, to a person, everyone's generally pretty nice. To their grander views, it can be levels of dangerous and terrifying. And that is when the author and the object and the work become linked, because this came from you as a piece of criticism or as a piece of vitriol or as a piece of whatever.
Actors, writers, comedians all get hate from somewhere, from someone at some point. And at some stage, you have to sit there and question, is it worth it? Is it worth it to me, Rachel the person, to be attacked for something Rachel the writer has written? Because they are one and the same. But at the same time, you try and distance yourself from the hate, because otherwise it can become insanely oppressive, especially in the world of the internet and social media.
I think there's a knowledge that, like whatever you do as an artist, it does have consequences in the real world. Like I have a family member who I have a relationship with that I've done a lot of introspection about our relationship. And I think a story of our relationship would make an excellent play one day. I am not going to write this play until this person is no longer with us, because I know that for me there are consequences for writing these things, and I can write what I write and it might be a beautiful piece of art. It might be the thing that changes my life as a playwright, but you can write what you want to write. You can say what you want to say. That doesn't absolve you from any of the consequences of it, even if it's the most amazing piece of art ever.
But it's also a case, not even the consequences, it's how someone else has interpreted your art that has led to those consequences. Because you could write a perfectly innocent script or poem or short story or whatever in your eyes. Again, all it takes is one potentially really angry person to read it the wrong way, and that's it. You are condemned, guilty without trial by the jury that is the internet.
Yeah, and so I write a lot of horror fiction, and a lot of times in my horror stories, as horror stories go, I mean, there's bad things happen to people, and if you just read my stories, you would think, wow, this guy is like really messed up in the head, he's a psychopath or something like that. But I'm not. I'm just like a nice, sweet, kind of introverted person, and this is just like these are the things that are coming out of my head artistically. You know, when I was a kid, I let my mom read a story I wrote, and it freaked her out, and she made me speak to our pastor because she thought like something was wrong with me. So I guess that was like my first instance in my life, in my creative life, where I realized, wow, okay, um, the art that I'm putting out there kind of like makes people think of me in a certain way. So I don't know. I try to be comfortable with that idea. Um, when people meet me in person after reading something I wrote, hopefully they are pleasantly surprised that I'm not a serial killer in real life. So, yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's how creativity works. It does stretch and it does push you into sometimes places where you don't feel comfortable. And in some ways, that produces the best work, at least in my opinion, anyway. Chris, your final thought on the subject?
I just think that we're kind of living in a runaway time where the ability to separate artist from art is a rarity. I think that writers might have the best opportunity because oftentimes writers can just put their work forward and then remain hidden and remain, out of the unseen eye. But when an audience clings on to any figure, any public figure, their ability to track you down and their ability to find things that you have done, if you've done anything of note or anything that puts you on a map, they will consume it, because a lot of times people who love a work of art claim it for themselves, and they do feel ownership over the art because of their love of it, because of their fandom of it, and that sometimes extends to the people behind it. So I think that we definitely live in a dangerous time for artists to try to separate from their art. I think that there's a web that we cannot just cut ourselves free of.
Alli, from the Tonys to the Olivier Awards, there are many different awards in the world of theatre, but do you think in the expansion of the number of awards available, more emphasis is being placed on winning awards? And if so, what could be the issues if the emphasis continues to grow?
First of all, awards are always subjective. There is, with playwriting, yes, you can have rubrics, and I have read for many festivals where there are rubrics to narrow down the finalists. But by the time you get to that stage, it's like really becomes a matter of preference. What I find problematic about some of the awards that playwrights at my level are kind of in competition for is, I always joke around that on my grave it's going to say was a semi-finalist for there's because there are so many awards that you get these you get shortlisted, or you're on a long list or whatever list for, and it becomes a line on your resume, and it doesn't become anything else. You might not even get an invite to see the play, or and I always think that the way that awards programs could work for semifinalists and finalists, like it could be an invitation to community. I had a play last year as a Bay Area Playwrights Festival, and a semifinalist, and when you're a semifinalist for that, you get a recommendation on New Play Exchange. The literary manager is always emailing every couple months, like, let us know about your play, and I have a reading that I'll be able to invite her to, because there's that investment and there's that community. And so I see awards as like the whole awards industry, and honoring it could be an invitation into community of plays that do have merit, and plays that folks have worked a long time on. But I feel like because there are so many now, and like anybody can make a play writing award and charge a submission fee and put it online and then pick their friend's plays and then their friend can put it on their resume. So but I do see like this, the proliferation of awards that can be an invitation for community, but it's really up to the individuals that are creating those awards to kind of foster that.
On the devil's advocate side of things, I do understand a lot of the, maybe not obviously with the Tonys and the Olivier Awards, but with the smaller, as you say, playwriting festivals and that kind of thing, I do understand some of the pressure that goes with that, having had, you know, submission windows for theatrical shenanigans, because you get so many wonderful pieces and then you sit there and think, oh my God, I have to judge these people? How on earth am I supposed to do that? It's just, and you have to create this kind of inner set of rules in your head as to, you know, what is and isn't what you're looking for. Definitely on the smaller side of things, awards, as you say, can open doors to a community. But at the same time, if you find yourself on the other side of those doors, the idea of having to pass judgment on anyone is genuinely quite terrifying. I don't think I would ever volunteer to read for anyone else's award.
I think ultimately, if you're curating a set too, it isn't an individual merit judgment on that one play. It's thinking about, like, if you're curating a night of one acts, how are all of the one acts going to fit together? I've had, there's a community theater that I've worked with in New Jersey that I absolutely love. And I've had plays that I know have made it to the finals but haven't been picked because there's a play that has a very similar theme and you can't have two plays about divorced people right next to each other when there's this wide range of things. So I think, you know, like, ultimately it's not personal. As a writer, I hope that the readers are coming at it with best intentions, but like ultimately they're just human, and there is that element of like, how does it fit into the overall goals? How does it fit into the other plays? There are so many factors that affect an individual selection that you can't get hung up on, like, I didn't win XYZ, therefore I'm a terrible playwright. That is not the case at all.
My concern with putting too much emphasis on winning awards is that inevitably certain genres get like left out in the cold, like science fiction, horror, murder mysteries, like things like that, which are seen as more like popcorn fare, are kind of like seen maybe as second class. And so those types of stories are not given the as much time or focus as maybe like a drama, you know, would be. And I think that's kind of that's sad, especially as someone who writes a lot of speculative stuff. So
yeah, I think it's kind of foolish to assume that the push for awards has not always been a part of the financial backing of every show that you've ever seen. And what's that quote? It's hard, you can't make a living on Broadway, but you can make a killing. You know, awards tend to be one of the few ways you can get a play to ultimately make money at the end of the day, at least on that grand scale. I don't think we're going to see that go away. To the extent that that's going to affect how people write, I'm not sure. To a person, maybe. Like to an artist who knows they will have you know, access to producers, who knows they can get their play produced, possibly. That is a possibility. To the other 98% of writers who will never see an award, and not because of a lack of talent, it has no emphasis. I think it will have no impact. With that said, they do need to give more awards to sci-fi and horror. Oh my God, it drives me crazy that people treat that like second-class literature. I hate that.
I think it does just come down to a stamp of approval. You know, if somebody else had approved of it, then it's worth, you know, it may be worth your time. And I know this from filmmaking. When you go into all these little festivals, the more laurels you can put on your your poster, the more, and if you look at the laurels on some posters, they are like, semi quarterfinalist, and was taken into consideration for, but because there are so many laurels on the poster, a lot of people are, and this is what catches eyes of producers in the filming community, is they see a poster and it has all these laurels on it, and they're like, well, that's one less risk I'm going to take because there are other people who have vetted it. And that does become an issue, is where's the vets coming from? Where, this vetting process might just be a bunch of, homemade festivals and a bunch of, locally done things, but that laurel looks great. You put it on your work, and as writers, it's always great on your resume. I won blank blank blank. This play won this and was produced this. So it's interesting, because I think that became an industry of its own. It's an industry of resume bullet points, and now we're in the thick of it, I guess.
But it's not even the details of what awards have been won. And I'm tremendously guilty of this, and you see it a lot on New Play Exchange, and I've seen it in quite a few people I've spoken to. So many people I've spoken to have got the title award-winning playwright, and that could be they've won 10 awards in a 40-year career, or they're like me and they've won one. But as soon as I won that one, that was it. I was officially allowed to change my title. And that's all that mattered. I don't care. I don't win any awards the rest of my life. I have one.
That's when it's handy to have your own theater company, run your own theater festival, award yourself, a prize.
I think for me, one thing that I think about in like evaluating the worth of is like what is this award measuring? So I had a play that was about body positivity and fat acceptance that was in a theater festival in Baltimore, and a reviewer came and reviewed the festival, and I wasn't in the top 5 of the 10 plays in there that she reviewed, but there was an audience choice award, and my play came in second. So for me, it's like, if I'm thinking about an award, I'm thinking about like what is the criteria, and who are the people making those decisions, and how does that relate to my goal as a playwright. And still, same with like, I submit to awards where I know like other theaters get invited to attend, because I'm like, okay, I probably won't win that award, but maybe another theater will see my play and remember me, because writing plays in a career in playwriting, it's a marathon. So you have to think of it in the long haul and think about what your goals are.
You can also tell a lot about what's viewed as important for a playwright by what you are asked by people when you tell them you're a playwright. So when I've told like friends or people I work with that I write plays, one of several things is normally asked. Do you make money? Have you won any awards? And where have your shows been on? And those are the 3 things: finances, awards, and international credit. And I always think that's interesting, because those are 3 things that you can physically see. You can like as an outsider, that person can measure that. They can say, oh yeah, he's been produced here, and here, or he has won this amount of money, or he has, as you said, Chris, this many laurels on their CV. But what you can't see is the woman who cried and got emotional at Alli's play, or the person who got scared out of their mind at one of Evan's horrors, or people who loved and appreciate your play but maybe didn't write in or didn't come up to you afterwards and tell you, but you had an impact. And I think that's the big danger with putting so much emphasis on awards, is anything else doesn't really matter. Alli, your final thought.
Yeah, my final thought goes back to what I was saying, just thinking about just like being very intentional. Why are you applying for that award? Like, ultimately, what is your goal, and how does that relate to the award and the reviewers of the award?
Okay, final question for you all. What is one thing about theatre that you have changed your mind about? Vidalia?
Honestly, the thing that was the biggest thing is just my opinion on theater as an art form. And so theater, honestly, it like I could get a little attention. Some people were kind of interested in things I tried. It felt more like it was last call at the bar, and I'm desperate and I'll just go home with whoever will take me. Quite honestly, I considered it an inferior medium. Um, and the opinion that changed is that where I've now fallen in love with the things that theater does that make it distinctly theater, with its ability to it with an audience, with the ability to have these moments completely surround you in a way that can never happen in film literature.
Evan.
Yeah, I guess the one thing about theater I've changed my mind about is just like what theater can be. Oh, I teach some theater classes at my middle school, and it's an elective class, but the school counselors really just put kids who are like didn't choose it to be their class. So I've got a lot of kids who are very, very shy, very, very unwilling to go on a stage. And then I have students who are very vocal about this is stupid, why am I here type of thing. So I, as a teacher, have had to kind of adapt with what my students are comfortable with, and we put on performances that maybe are not what you would expect to see as traditional theater. Theater can be so many things, and I've learned that as an educator over the years.
Alli.
Yeah, I think over the years and as more theater makers of different backgrounds create theater and people have the opportunity to see theater, I have always felt that like theater is for everybody, but sometimes it was hard to quantify that. And recently I had the experience of seeing a play with my husband, and the play incorporated elements. It was Poor Yellow Rednecks, a wonderful play. Produced that play. Everybody see that play. And as we were leaving, my husband, who came from a similar background to the playwright and had similar interests in comics or things that may not have always been seen as like serious quote unquote big T theater, he, as we were leaving, he said, why didn't you tell me plays could be like this? I would have seen plays long ago if I had known there were plays that existed like this. So that we have to be telling these stories, because we can say theater is for everyone until our faces are blue, but if people aren't seeing themselves in stories, they're going to write theater off as a medium until they see themselves in those stories.
Absolutely. And finally, Chris.
You can have anything you want in theater. Theater is not as restrictive as a lot of people imagine, because it's easy to forget how ingenious theater artists are, how amazing they are at putting on stage impossible things. So whereas I used to think, well, I've only got this much budget, or I've only got this much space, or I only got this, I started writing with no frame. I started writing far more expansive, and it's super rewarding. So what I've changed my mind about is not to worry about how a piece is going to be done, because that is, as the writer, is not your responsibility. How it's done is for, set designers and directors to curse your name later. And that's, what started happening was I started writing since 2020. I've written 60 full-length plays. And in that time, I've been like not thinking of the proscenium.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what's the story and what's the biggest story I can tell? And then I'll let someone else worry about it.
Okay, we are out of time. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This has been absolutely lovely.
Thank you, Robin.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of The Panel Presents. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Evan, Alli, Chris and Vidalia as much as I did, and you'll be able to join us on the 4th of May for our next episode. Coming up though, we start our brand new series of theatrical shenanigans tomorrow on the 8th of April from 10 AM UK time, with the play Treatable by Marnie Thompson and my guest Laura Hogan. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. I very much look forward to introducing a new set of panellists next month, but in the meantime though, I've been Rachel Feeney Williams, this is Theatrical Shenanigans, bringing down the curtain and saying, I hope you can join us next time. Theatrical Shenanigans is part of an RFW Scripts production, found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts and Podbean. Theme music is written and produced by Chris Cody.